Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful Chag. We'll learn today Le'iloi Nishma Sarah Bas Reb Moshe. Her neshama should have an aliyah. Okay, we're on the last three words of Nun Gimel Amid Beis. Tanu Rabbanan. Ein Machmitzin. Now, the whole topic that we're dealing with in today's Gemara is a continuation of the Mishnah, which talks about the two types of menachos, the only two types of menachos where the bread is leavened, because all other menachos have to be unleavened. So there's chametz only in two types of menachos. One is the 10 out of the 40 loaves of the korban toda, and the other is the shtei halechem, the 2 loaves of bread that are made for Shavuos offering. So Tanu Rabbanan, ein machmitzin betapuchim. When we leaven those breads, we're not allowed to leaven them with apples, or with a fruit-based leavening agent. Okay. So why? Because it's not a proper leavener is the ostensibly the reason. And Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Amro Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Amru Machmitzin, and in the name of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel he disagrees and says no, it's a perfectly fine leavening agent. And Rav Kahana Masni la Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan. Rav Kahana said it wasn't Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, but it was rather Rabbi Chanina ben Trajan who said it, but it was one of the Rabbi Chaninas. Now, Kiman Azla Haditnan. So now let's look at a Mishnah. This Mishnah is in Maseches Trumos, having to do with tithing, and really having to do with truma that gets mixed in with chulin. That's called meduma. And really the halacha is that if the truma is still detectable in any way, even if you have a huge super majority of chulin over the truma is not batal, and you have to treat it all as truma, and it's usher to a Yisrael, and it's only mutter to a Kohen. So the Mishnah says, Tapuach sherisko v'nasno b'socha isa v'chimtza harezu asura. If you have an apple that's made from truma, you puree it, and then you pour it into a dough and use it as a leavening agent. So the halacha is that that apple was made from truma. It was a truma apple. So the halacha is that the entire mixture is considered to be truma and will be usher to a non-kohen. Now, Kiman, who does that go according to? Lema Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel hivalo Rabbanan. It must be like Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, who says that apples are an effective leavener, and therefore, since the leavening agent is detectable in the entire dough, it has to be treated like the status of the leavener, which is truma. So the Gemara says no. Afilu tema Rabbanan nehi dechametz gamer lohavi nuksha miyahavi. So the Gemara says this is not necessarily based on the machlokes. Even the chachamim who say that you may not leaven with a fruit would agree that if apple puree falls in, it is considered to be detectable throughout, because granted that it's not a proper leavener, it's not the premium type of leavener for which you need to leaven menachos, but it has a somewhat leavening quality, perhaps a retarded leavening quality, not a full leavening quality, which is what the term chametz nuksha means, but it has a leavening quality, a subpar leavening quality nonetheless. And that's the reason why it still would be considered detectable throughout the dough mixture for the purposes of truma. Next, Amar Rabbi. Now we're going to see another machlokes. Amar Rabbi Ila ein lecha hakasha lekmitza yoser miminchas chote. Now, there's something called the minchas chote, which is a mincha that is brought as a sin offering for a person who, in certain instances, if you commit a sin like entering the temple in a state of tumah, the Torah grants you permission, if you are very poor, to bring a flour offering as your atoning offering. However, because it is a sin atonement, it does not have any of the enrichments that you would normally put in. So you can't add oil to that. So Rabbi Ila is of the opinion, since the Torah says it's a flour offering without oil, it's just pure flour. And because it's in its powder form, it is the most difficult substance to do proper kemitza with. Why? Because when you're dealing with such a fine powder, invariably when you scrape the sides with your thumb and your pinky, which is what kemitza is, to get that pure fistful proper measurement, you're invariably going to be scraping off too many particles, because the particles sort of, it's very difficult to get it just exact, right? Because they're not packed in tightly. Yes? So that's why it's such a difficult process, and it requires sort of like a soft touch to get just the right amount of kemitza. Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi Omar minchas chote megabla b'mayim ukeshera. And Rav Yitzchak disagrees, and he says, what are you talking about? Just add water to the flour. It's no longer going to be so powdery, and the kemitza is just as simple as it is, or just as effortless as it is with other types of menachos that have oil. So lema baha kamiflagi, demar sover kamo shehein misha'arina, numar sover lekamo shahayu misha'arina. Let us suggest that the machlokas is as follows. This relates to a discussion from yesterday's daf, having to do with the density of the yeast. You know, over here, perhaps the machlokas is as follows. Rav Ila says, the reason why I don't permit you to add water is because if you would add a very small amount of water, and you would create a very thick, dense, tightly packed flour substance, the density would be more dense than regular powder, which is only separated by air, right? And therefore you would not get a proper measurement of what a normal kemitza would be for a dry measure flour offering. If you add too much water, then you're going to have such a loose and, what's the opposite of the word dense? I don't know, loosely packed flour, because it's going to be separated by more water, and therefore you're going to have less than the requisite amount of flour. So the reason why there's this machlokas is because Rav Ila holds, by adding water, you're either going to have too much flour in your hands for a proper kemitza, or too little flour in your hands for a proper kemitza. And Rav Yitzchak says, no, you deal with it as it is, as is. So add water, and whatever is in your hand is a proper kemitza, regardless of how many particles of flour are in there.
But if not in the Oni's situation, but in the other person who wants to bring a kemitza, it's mixed with oil.
It's mixed with oil.
And so that's not the same problem?
Yeah, no, it's not the same problem, because the Torah prescribes oil in that amount. So the kemitza amount is a requisite mixture of oil and flour that the Torah says, I want you to have in your fist, a fistful of that mixture. But here, since the Torah prescribes flour only, even if you were to say, okay, so fine, so add a little water, what's the big deal? Water is nothing, right? But still, it's an issue of the density of the flour. You're going to end up with too many particles of flour or too few. So the Gemara says low. No, that's not the machlokas. The kuli alma kamo shehein misharin uvahakam iflagi demar sover mai chareva mishemen umar sover chareva mikol davar. So the Gemara says no, that's not really at all what they're arguing about. The argument has nothing to do with the density of the pack, the flour pack, but rather it has to do with whether or not water is permitted to be added to this dry flour offering. How does the Torah describe the word flour-only offering? It calls it chareva. Chareva literally means dry. So Rav Ila says dry means totally devoid of any additives. So therefore it's just got to be totally just flour and nothing else. And Rav Yitzchak says no, dry means devoid of oil, but not devoid of other additives. If you just want to add water, it's perfectly okay. So in reality, this has nothing to do with the density issue. It's got to do with whether water can be added biblically to a chareva offering, a sin offering. Okay, let's go on. Tanan Hasim. Let's look at another Mishnah. Basar ha'egel shenitfachu basar zekena shenismayich mishtarin lekamos shehein. Now, there's a Mishnah that uses the following language. It says that, and here the Rashi tells us a scientific phenomenon. If I take a piece of meat from a calf, from a young animal, and I leave it out, there's a tendency for that tissue, the meat, to swell. And if I have a piece of meat from an older animal, then I leave it out, there's a tendency for that meat to shrivel and get smaller. I don't know the chemical reasons for that. Maybe someone who's a doctor and has dissected tissue could enlighten us. I don't know, but it has to do with the age of the animal from which the meat came from. So the question is like this. We know when it comes to the laws of tumah, in order for a food item to be able to transmit tumah, when it becomes tameh, it can only transmit tumah if it is the requisite size of a kibetza, which is 2 kazayases, right? It has to be the size of a kibetza, the size of an egg. Let's say it was a piece of calf meat that when it became tamei was less than the size of a kibetza, and then it was left out and it swelled, and now it's the size of a kibetza. Can it transmit tumah or not? Or conversely, let's say it was a piece of meat from an old animal, and when it became tamei it was the size of a kibetza, and then it was left out and it shriveled and it shrinks, and now it's smaller than a kibetza. Does it transmit tumah or not? So the Mishnah uses a cryptic, sort of an ambiguous language. It says you measure it likemos shehein, to what it is. So there's a machlokas now. Rav v'Reb Chiya v'Reb Yochanan amrin mishtarin kemos shehein. Shmuel v'Reb Shimon bar Rebbe v'Reish Lakish amri mishtarin lekemos shehayu. So the machlokas is, what does that terminology mean? So one set of Amoraim, including Rabbi Yochanan, says you view it as what its current state is. If right now it's the size of a kibetza, it transmits tumah, even though originally it was smaller, like the calf meat. And if right now it's smaller than a kibetza, even though, like by the older animal meat, if it was originally larger and then it shriveled, you look at it what it is now. Reish Lakish and his other Amoraim say no. You look at it from what it was originally. If originally it was smaller, then its swelling in size is meaningless. And if originally it was larger, its shrinking is also meaningless. So meso, very clear machlokas, right? So meisve. So let's raise a contradiction. Basar, the Brisa says as follows: Basar ha'egel shelo hayabo kishir v'tafach ve'amad al kishir tohar l'sha'avar v'tamei mikanu lahaba. The Brisa says that if I have a piece of calf meat that did not have the size of a kibetza when it became tamei, and then later on it was left out and it swelled up to the size of a kibetza. So the Brisa says whatever it touched when it was smaller is tahor, but whatever it touches from now on in its new kibetza size will become tamei. So doesn't that prove that you'd look at it from what it is now, not what it was originally? Kasha on Reish Lakish. So the Gemara says no, midrabanan. That's only rabbinically, but biblically you deal with it from what it was originally, that it's smaller. So ihachi ema safe, but how can you tell me it's rabbinically? Look at the next part of the brisa. V'chein bepigel v'chein benosar. The same halacha holds true by pigel and nosar, which is sacrificial law, not tumah law. At least that's the havamin of the Gemara. What sacrificial law states is that if a person eats a kizayas of pigel or nosar, he gets kares. And ostensibly what the Brisa is saying is that the same halacha will be is that if originally it was smaller than a kazayas of pigel, and then it becomes to the size of pigel and I eat it, I will get kares. Now, iyamart bishlama deoraisa hainu deika pigel v'nosar. Ela iyamart derabanan pigel v'nosar miderabanan miika. But it's how could that be that I'm going to get kares for something that only has the requisite shear rabbinically, but midioraisa is not dealt with as a requisite amount? That doesn't make any sense. How can the Brisa say that I'm subject to kares if it's only a rabbinical law? So the Gemara says, Ema v'chein betumas pigel v'chein betumas nosar. Sal gadaita chamina hol v'tumas pigel v'tumas nosar derabanan hi kule hai b'derabanan lo avid rabanan kamash malan. So the Gemara says, no, you misunderstood the Brisa. The Brisa is not talking about subjectivity to kares. What the Brisa is talking about throughout is just the laws of tumah. And here's an interesting halacha that is really is introduced elsewhere, but it's not something that we run across every day. The rabbis made a decree that if a kohen touches a kazayas of pigel, rabbinically he becomes tamei, or nosar. Now he doesn't ingest it, so he's not going to get kares for it, but if he touches it, he becomes tamei. Now why did they make that law? So Rashi says it's because there were certain Kohanim who were suspect of maybe wanting to pocket it and take it home with them, right, and ignoring the fact that it was pigel. So the rabbis wanted to create an additional distancing from this meat, and they said, no, you touch it, you become tamei. So no one can touch it. So the point is like this, that's a rabbinic law. So I might have thought, says the Gemara, that let's say I have a piece that's smaller than a kazayas. So even rabbinically, you don't get tamei because it's not a kazayas of pigel. It's left out. It swells up in size to the size of a kazayas. So you could have argued, well, since this is only a rabbinic law that you become tamei by touching a kazayas of pigul, and this really originally wasn't even the size of a kazayas, so rabbinically we're going to be machmir on something that swells inside, but it's only a derabanan originally anyway. So why be so machmir on one derabanan on top of another derabanan, right? So the chiddush is, nonetheless, says the Brisa, we are still machmir. That even though rabbinically, it's only a rabbinic law that you become tamei, and even though it's only rabbinic that you deal with this as a kazayas, nevertheless we're going to render you tamei. That's the point of the Brisa. It's got nothing to do with subjectivity to kares. Now, Tashma, let's look at the next part of the Brisa. Basar zekena shahayabo kishir v'tzamak lepachos mikishir tamei l'shavar v'tamei mikanu lahaba. But look at what the Brisa says about the piece of meat from an older animal, which, remember, we said if you leave it out, it tends to shrink. So if it originally had the requisite shear of a kibetza and then it shrunk, then it's whatever it touched previously when it had the requisite shear is tamei, and whatever it touches from now on is not going to be tamei. So once again, it proves Rabbi Yochanan's point that you deal with what it is now, not what it was before. So Amar Rabba, so Rabba says, okay, listen, we got to clarify this point. Kol heicha demiikara havabei v'hashta lesbei halesbei v'kol heicha demiikara lo havabei v'hashta havabei midrabanan. You're right. There is no machlokes in the case that we thought there was a machlokes. Everyone agrees that if it originally had the requisite shear, and then it shrinks so it doesn't have the requisite shear of a kibetza, like the meat from an older animal, it's not going to render anything tamei because it doesn't have the requisite shear. And everyone will also agree that if it was calf meat that originally was not a kibetza, and then it swelled up to the size of a kibetza, so then everyone would agree that currently only midirabanan you deal with it as being able to be metame other things, because originally it didn't have the requisite shear. So really we're lenient in both cases. However, what's the chumrah? Ki pligi kagon shahayabo kishir v'tzamak v'chazar v'tafach. The machlokes is, and only in the following case, between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. What the following case is, what if I had a piece of meat that originally was the size of a kibetza, I left it out in the sun and it shriveled up and it shrunk to the size of a kibetza. Then, for whatever reason, either because of temperature or because it started to rain, it started to swell up again, and now it's back to the size of a kibetza. The question is, does it go back to its original status of being able to be metame other things, or do we say that since there was a lapse in its requisite shear, it permanently loses its status of being a metame, something that can be metame other things? So this is the machlokas. The mar savar yesh dichui bi'isura, umar savar ein dichui bi'isura. So Rabbi Yochanan says, look at it now. If right now it's the size of a kibetza, you go back to its original state and it's metame. But a Reish Lakish says no. You look at it. Look, at one point it was precluded from its power, and therefore it's permanently precluded from its power to be metame, and therefore it's not metame. So, frek the Gemara, umiika lamanda amar diyesh dichui beisurin. How can you say that Reish Lakish holds that way? That there's such a concept of that once something is temporarily precluded, it's permanently precluded from its power to aser. V'hatnan, look at the following Mishnah that contradicts that. Kebeitza ochlin shehinicha bechama v'nismaata v'chein kezayis min hameis kezayis min hanavela v'cha'adash min hasheretz u'kezayis pigul u'kezayis noser kezayis chelav ta'orin. So the Mishnah is talking about the laws of Tumah. I have a kibetza size of food that became tamei, and I left it out in the sun, and it shriveled, and then it started to rain, and as we'll see in just a minute, first we look at it when it shriveled in the sun. First we'll look at it in smaller than the size of a kibetza. Or let's say I have a kazayas of corpse flesh, which is the requisite amount you need for a piece of corpse flesh to be metame other things. Or a kazayas of carrion, or a barley size of a sheretz that is metame, or a kazayas of pigul, or a kazayas of nosar, which rabbinically are metame, or a kazayas of chelev, which also is rabbinically mitame. So since currently it is shriveled and is smaller than the requisite shear, it does not have the ability to be mitame. Ve'ein chayovin alei mishum pigul v'noser v'chelev, nor will I be liable for these things if I consume them. I don't get kares for them because they're smaller than the shear of the kazayas for the kodshim items. Now hinichan b'geshamim v'tavchu timeim v'chayovin alei mishum pigul v'noser v'chelev. But if I put them out in the rain after they shriveled and they get reconstituted to their original size, so then these things are now mitame again. And if it's pigul or noser or chelev and I ingest them, I'm going to get kares. So what do you see from here? That even midioraisa, biblically, just because something was precluded temporarily because it shrunk, does not preclude it permanently, and it can be reconstituted to its original status of isser. So tiyufta laman dharma yesh dichui bi'isurin tiyufta. This is an absolute refutation of the position that we're ascribing to Reish Lakish, that if something is temporarily precluded from its asurability, I guess, then it's permanently precluded. We see not that way. Just because something temporarily shrunk, but then grew back to its original size, it regains all of that original status of being able to asur things.
Is it tamei itself?
Well, it itself will always become tamei. Any food item that touches a source of tumah will become tamei, regardless of its size. As far as its ability to make other things tamei, it has to have a requisite size of a kibetza.
So it's not going back and forth. It's just
right.
Its transmissibility is going back.
Its ability to transmit tumah. There you go. Tashma. So tormin te'enim ala grogeros b'minyan. Now, here again, we're dealing with the issue of something was originally one size, and now it's a different size. How do you deal with it? Do you deal with it based on what its original size was, or do you deal with it based on its current size? Now, instead of dealing with the laws of tumah, we're dealing with the laws of tithing. And here, and like Rashi points out, the havamin of the Gemara is that we're talking about meiser. And we talk about taking meiser, which is 10%. You tithe, you can take fresh figs and use them as the tithe agent for dry figs. And you do it b'minyan. You basically say, listen, if I got 90 dried figs, I use 10 fresh figs. I can use 10 fresh figs as the tithe for 90 dry figs. Now, if we were looking at their volume currently, 90 dry figs is smaller in volume than even 10 fresh figs. A fresh fig is a gesunter thing, right? It's nice, juicy, fresh, plump, right? And a dried fig is a dried fig. It's pressed, it's compact, right? So you're clearly not getting, you're taking much more than 10% in volume if you look at it at its current volume. So what we're trying to prove from here is that you base the volume sizes in halacha based on its original size, not on its current size. And that's why taking 10 figs, fresh figs, for 90 dry figs is a fair amount of 10%. So iyamart bishlama lekamos shahayu misharinan shapir. If you say that you look at the original size, not like it is now, but what it was originally when it was plump, so it works out, the numbers work out. Ela iyamart kemos shehein havale marbe b'maisros v'tanya hamarbe b'maisros perosav misukan umasrosav mikulkolin. But if you're going to tell me you look at the current volume of what it is right now, then it's not going to work properly, because if you're supposed to take, with meiser, you're supposed to take exactly 10%. If you take too little, of course, you haven't accomplished meiser. But what if you take too much? What if I take 20 or 30%? So the halacha is, whatever's left after I take meiser is perfectly kosher. It's perfectly kosher chulin, it's fine. But the problem is that the excess of what I've tithed, only 10%, only the original 10% goes to the Levi. What happens to the other stuff? That has the law of tevel. It's considered to be untithed because nothing was used to tithe it, and it's not meiser either. So therefore, you haven't done a correct tithing process. You're going to have to take that excess above the 10% and tithe it again, and you haven't done that. So the whole Mishnah doesn't work if you go according to the current volume. You have to say, doesn't this prove that you go according to its original volume? So the Gemara says, Elamai lekamos shehein. So the Gemara says, so what's l'kamo shahayu, really? So what is the alternative? So you're going to tell me you're going to prove from here that you go according to what its original size was, and that's why it's a fair 10%? But ema seifa, then if that's the case, look at the next part of that self-same Mishnah. Grogeros al hate'enim b'mida. If you want to do the opposite, instead of using fresh figs as the tithe for dried figs, let's say you want to use dry figs as the tithe for fresh figs. Now, if what you're saying is correct, that you look at it what it's originally, so then no problem. 10 dry figs for 90 fresh figs. But that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says you have to use volume for this. So if you have 90 fresh figs, you're going to have to take like 500 dry figs or whatever the amount would be in order to get to 10%, you know. And so why should that be? Why don't you, according to what you're saying, you should look at it what its original size was. You should look at 10 dried figs as 10 fresh figs. So why does the Mishnah change? So Iyomart Bishlam Kamo Shehin Shapir. If you look at it, you deal with it as it's at its current volume. So then I can understand why you use volume, right? In this case, Ela Iyomart Likamos Shahayu Marbe B'Maisrosu. But if you deal with it what its original state was, so there too, you're taking too much meiser, and again you're messing up again. So elahacha b'truma gedola askinan v'reisha b'ayin yafa v'seifa b'ayin yafa. So the Gemara says, so you can't prove anything from here, because in reality our Mishnah is not talking about meiser, which is a flat 10%, but rather it's talking about truma gedola, the tithe that you give to the Kohen, not the tithe that you give to the Levi. Now, how much is truma gedola? The Torah never places an amount, a percentage amount, on how much truma you have to take. Chazal say that the average amount is supposed to be 2% or 1/50th of your produce. But you're allowed to do more and you're allowed to do less, And if that's the case, what the Mishnah really here is just advocating is be generous. And therefore, if you're going to use fresh figs as the tithe, as the truma, then you should do it by counting. In other words, let's say if you have, let's say, 98 dry figs, take 2 fresh figs, right? And be generous and add on. And if you have 98 fresh figs, don't just take 2 dry figs, because then you're being miserly, but rather,
Miserly.
yeah. But no, this is truma, right? But so what you want to do is take more, so that you make up the volume of what would be if it was 2 fresh figs. Take that volume, maybe that's like a couple of dozen dried figs, to make it up. So that's what it is, and so that you can't infer anything from here. So ihachi ema seifa. But wait a minute, if you're telling me that we're dealing with truma, which is only 2%, then the next part of the Mishnah doesn't make any sense. What does the next part say? Amar Rabbi Elazar b'Rabbi Yossi, Abba hayanotel eser grogro shebemiksoa al tishim shebekalkola. Rabbi Elazar testifies that his father, Rabbi Yossi, was not concerned about the current volume, but always said that as long as it's used, you can always use numbers. So even if you have 90 fresh figs, you could take 10 dried figs and use that as the proper tithe. Now, v'i b'truma gedola eser mayavidita. And if we're talking about truma gedola, where do you get this 10%? 10 for 90 is not the amount that you're supposed to take for truma. So the numbers are all off here. What is going on? If you're talking about truma, then he shouldn't be using an example of 10%. He should be using a different figure. So Ella hacha b'trumas meiser askinan va'abelazar ben goimelu. So the Gemara says you're right. It's not talking about meiser, and it's not talking about truma gedola either. You know what it's talking about? A third tithe, which is called trumas meiser. And what is trumas meiser? It is when the Kohen gets his truma, he's supposed to take 10% of that, according to the Torah, and give it to the Levi. That's what's trumas meiser. That's what the Torah calls trumas meiser, where the Kohen takes his tithe and gives 10% of his tithe to the Levi. Now, what?
I think it's for clarity.
I'm sorry.
The Kohen.
I got it just the reverse. The Levi gets his tithe and he gives 10% of his tithe to the Kohen. Sorry. So but what's interesting about Trumas Meiser is that it has the features in some respects of Meiser, in the sense that it's got to be 10%. But in some features, it is like Truma in that it doesn't have to be an exact 10%. So whereas by Truma, the Torah says whatever you want, but here the Torah says 10%. But in one respect, it is like Truma in that if you want to go give more than 10%, you're okay. If you want to give a little bit less than 10%, you're also okay. You can just eyeball it. D'Tanya, Abelazar ben Gomel Omer, v'nechshav lechem trumaschem b'shtei trumos hakasav medaber, echas truma gedola, ve'echas trumas meiser. The Torah links two types of truma together. One is the truma gedola, and the other one is trumas meiser that the Levi gives to the Kohen. Kishem shetruma gedola niteles ba'omed uvemachshava, kach trumas meiser niteles ba'omed uvemachshava. That in what way is regular truma and trumas meiser linked? That just like Truma Gedola can be given just by eyeballing it, by estimating, so too Trumas Meiser can be given by eyeballing. And therefore, that's why the number, the figure of 10% is relevant, because we're talking about Trumas Meiser, and that's what Rabbi Yossi used to do. He used to take 10 dry figs and use it as the 10% for 90 fresh figs. So the Gemara says, and basically, ma truma gedola ba'ayin yafa, av trumas meiser ba'ayin yafa. But just like truma gedola should be given generously, so too should trumas meiser be given to the Kohen generously, meaning that when you make the estimate, always err in the favor of the Kohen. So Amar, and on that, umina, but the Gemara says, but if that's the case, then we have another question. Let's go back to that case. Amar Rabbi Lazar bar Rabbi Yossi, Abba hayanotel eser grogo shebimikso al tishim shebekalkola. But then bring a proof from that very case of where Rabbi Lazar says that my father Rabbi Yossi used to take 10 dry figs and use them as the fair amount of 10% for the Trumas Meiser on 90 fresh figs. It doesn't amrit bishlama lekamos shehein amrinan shapir. If you deal with it as far as what it was originally, so because you look at 10 dry figs as 10 fresh figs. So then I understand he's taking a fair amount. But Ella, Iamart Kemos Shehain Batzerluhu. But if you're telling me that you look at it at its current volume, so then this is not even anywhere near 10%. So how could this be considered to be a fair Trumas Meiser of 10%? So the Gemara answers, Ki Asa Ravdimi Amar Rabbi Lazar Shiny Grogros Hol V'Yochol L'Sholkon L'Achasirin L'Kamos Shehain. And this is really the final answer, is that Ravdimi says in the name of Rabbi Lazar, the whole story about dried figs and moist and fresh figs, you got it all wrong. All of your premises were wrong, because you were working under the premise that a dried fig in its current state is far less volume than a fresh fig, which is true. But halachically, you look at it as a fresh fig, not because you deal with it based on what it was originally, but because since you could always reconstitute it, if you were to take a dried fig and let it simmer in water, it would eventually plump up to its original size. And that's the reason why you can look at it as a fresh fig. Not because we're going to deliberate on the issue of do you look at it what it was or what it is. That's not even part of our discussion. Even if you look at it based on what it currently is, even in its current state of a dried, shriveled fig, we still look at it as a fresh, plump fig because it's reconstitutable as a large fig. And that's the reason why my father felt justified, says Rabbi Lazar, of taking 10 dried figs and using them as the fair 10% tithe on 90 fresh figs. And this is where we'll hold it for today.